your other conference call there, Colin, but as you probably heard, we've got a blizzard here.
Yeah, and I didn't realize when I saw the thing from Chris, I just responded without really looking at this meeting. So
Right.
Tuesday should work maybe for everybody.
Yeah, that should be fine for me at least.
Okay, he confirmed on Tuesday.
Okay.
All right. Well, Trevor, I guess you're pretty aware of the reason why we're having this, just to kind of get all the background and as much detail as possible on Quartza, what is, what was, what is now type of thing, and we'll have this recording to refer to once you've departed.
All right, sounds good. So is there any particular order you want to go through stuff in, or should I just start?
You might as well just start, Trevor. We'll probably jump in with some questions, but I know just from quick words with you last week, it seems that what they initially were going to get in terms of a solution is quite changed over time. Is that correct?
Yes, that is very much correct.
Okay, then. I guess if it's okay with everybody else, Trevor, you can just, I guess, basically let us know what they finally did get in terms of a solution set from us.
Okay. Excuse me. It is primarily a planning tool. You know, we're not doing any kind of predictive forecasting or anything for them. They do their own forecasting, which they then upload into our system, and then we use that as a starting point for them to plan against.
Trevor, would you know what they generate that forecasting in, or is it just?
I don't. I think like they have a number of internal databases. They've got an Access database. They've got an S2K database. I think the forecasting is probably some combination of manual estimates. They probably do some of that stuff still in a manual sheet, if I had to guess. And then probably some database queries that they've put together against their S2K actuals data.
Do they have an ERP system, Trevor?
Not that we've provided. I'm not sure of the scope of their internal tools, but
okay.
I got to assume at some level they've got other planning tools.
And they're using Smart Spreadsheet as the planning tool itself, along with Web Publish, of course.
Yes. Yeah, our role in their supply chain is primarily production planning and scheduling. Everything from sort of year-long high-level product mix planning right down to product level per day, almost machine level scheduling is sort of the final piece that we're pushing towards. So they've got everything from, like I said, year-long high-level planning right down to daily, almost hourly, because some of the reports are production level scheduling that they print off, and based on how long a product is scheduled to run and what's scheduled to come after it, you know, they've got an hourly production schedule that they hand off to the shop floor employees to help guide them actually run the machines on the, at the lowest level. The bulk of the planning is probably done in the daily order lineup. So there's one for each site, Laurel Hill and Chattanooga. Yeah. And those are a rolling 90-day window planning tool. So those, along with the product mix, are where the bulk of the planning is done, and those are the most complex parts of the application.
Okay.
There's a lot of custom logic that went into those Excel sheets to, first of all, mimic some of the sheets and templates that they had before, so we could give them something that they're used to seeing. and then to try to automate a lot of their planning, because in many cases, the plan that doesn't necessarily change a whole lot from cycle to cycle or year to year. They sort of know what they're after. So they rely on defaults or formulas or, predefined calculations based on various product specs to help generate plans for them. So as part of the daily order lineup, I put together a pretty sizable custom user form. It's a pop-up scheduler, essentially, where if they don't want to manually type in daily production, which they usually don't, it's time-consuming, they can use the scheduler, which will pull in all kinds of data across different tables and data sets to pull in all the specifications for each level of the production process, and then based on existing inventory levels, what they're already running, what they need to have done for a certain shipment date. This will help sort of generate the correct amount of quantity in the correct amount of time. So they've got different offsets for due dates. So if something is due on day 4, usually they want to set it back a few days to give them a bit of lead time just to make sure everything's ready to go before they have to ship. So that's all built into this pop-up scheduler, and it proved to be pretty successful, enough so that once other members of the team got wind of this thing, they wanted their own version. So I had to put together a standalone version of that scheduler that anyone could view, because starting off, it was only in the daily order lineup, and that was maybe not a privileged report, I guess, but something that not everyone needs to see or is allowed to use.
And that's the pop-up, Trevor?
Yes, that pop-up scheduling form.
Right.
I had to create a standalone version of that because everyone else wanted to play with it, since it pulled all the data they need to see, essentially, into one place. And it kind of live refreshes as you change values, so they could sort of play with the numbers, tweak values, and see how that would affect their plan. And in the case of the daily order lineup, then they could actually just apply that production to the sheet and save it once they were happy with the result.
Hey, Trevor, do you mind sharing your screen so that we can actually see what you're talking about?
Sure.
Okay, let me hand the stuff over to you, Trevor. And I also want to know how many actual, how many actual planners there are, and did that increase from, like, initial?
It probably decreased, actually. I think not necessarily anything to do with our product. It's just they had some turnover, I guess. And now, as far as I know, there is one person who's handling all the high-level planning, more or less. I think they're looking to hire someone else.
Right.
Yeah, right now there's one sort of primary planner and then a number of people that sort of operate at each smaller stage of planning. So there's like a weaving process and a treating process and a twisting process,
sure.
And they've got planners at each of those levels.
Did you get the controls over? There you go, yeah. Okay, wasn't sure. Sometimes it doesn't work very well.
WebEx always does this.
Trevor, for the people who are using the pop-up scheduler, you mentioned that obviously the daily order lineup folks, it becomes an input to that. But are other people using it and perhaps loading it into somewhere else?
The other one is just read-only. It's more of a reference tool, but as far as I know, it gets used fairly often for excuse me, Well, to help planning at other levels of the process, I guess, where they can, I'll show you this one, and then I'll show you the other one. The other one includes all SKUs, so they can just flip through it and find all the specs and everything in one place. So it's just it's a good reference tool. So this is the plan calculator or the pop-up scheduler. So depending on what item they've selected, what row they've selected when they activate this, it'll pull in all the specs it can find, all the data it can find for that item, and then help either recommend a volume to produce if they're short, or let them manually enter a volume and assign it to a machine to get daily weave production as well. So this one form can handle both sheets, the treated and weave. So it saves them a lot of time if they are happy with the numbers that it produces. So you can see here the specs for each step of the process. The first three machines are weaving machines, and they'll be used to determine the daily weave production if they want to apply that to the weave daily order lineup as well. And then these are the twisting machines if they want to see pounds per day or efficiency settings and that kind of thing for the twisting machines. So there's a number of formulas on the sheet that keep track of production totals and the estimated hours that it'll take to complete their production run. So if I were to enter something here. Okay, so that one's quick to run, so 10,000 pounds only takes about 3 hours. And that all gets factored into the calculator as well, because typically they don't want to schedule more than 24 hours a day, even though they often do, which just means that it spills over into the next day. And then the inventory section here, it's a bunch of formulas to sort of keep track of projected inventory based on their sales and what they're planning to produce on a given day. So they can look out up to 90 days ahead here and see where their inventory levels are going to be at, unless they take some action. So typically the way they would use this, as I understand it, is they would look at their inventory levels and find instances where it goes below zero, where they've got a negative projected quantity here. And then they would use the plan calculator, and it would suggest the volume they need based on a number of constraints and specifications to meet that demand for that day. And then, like I said, they can assign a machine for it to run on if they want to assign weaving production. They can tweak the numbers here, efficiency settings. Anything that's not grayed out, they can change, and that'll live update all the other parameters, calculations, etc. And then when they're happy with that, if they want to go ahead, they just hit accept, and it'll place it on the sheet. There's also a number of warnings. These came about after a number of discussions back and forth with the planners on the number of sort of edge cases they might encounter. So I tried to cover all of my bases to make sure that any time something might require their attention, that I notify them of it. So if the run time exceeds 24 hours, or if the production is expected to be set back so far that it would fall off the sheet, production might be set in the past in some cases. So there's a number of additional warnings and logic to go with that to help make sure that the plan they're entering actually makes sense. But you can see I went ahead and scheduled that, so now we're in the green again. And it's entered that production on the sheet, set back the number of days that they've specified. So that is one of the, perhaps the most complicated part of this application, since it pulls so many sources and has a ton of rules, both that Cordza has defined and that I've worked with Cordza to try and define, so that it gives them the results they want as quickly as they can get them. And aside from that, it's more or less a standard Excel editable sheet where they can type in any of these production values by hand if they want, but after some use cases they decided they wanted a little more automated, a smarter system, so that's where that plan calculator came from. And then there's a bunch of just pivot table reference sheets that they requested, since they like to refer to all their data sets before they make any decisions. So this daily order lineup is essentially a one-stop shop for them to do all of their planning at this level, at a daily level. And that gets run every day. This is by far the most used report that I'm aware of. Let me just refresh my Firefox.
Trevor, perhaps when you have a bit of time, could you run a usage report? I don't know if you've got that set up.
I do. I'd have to log into their network to get you real results. Let's see here. I'll start that in the background.
Yeah, just sometime. It's not critical. I'd just like to see what reports and who's running them.
Yeah, the ones that get run the most are like I said, the daily order lineup, and then the schedules get run pretty often since they are, well, they'll change daily because we're planning at a daily level here. So every day they run the schedule, they get new results, and they'll usually print those off or use those schedules to create their own schedules that they'll hand off to the shop floor people. The product mix is the other high-level planning report. This is the yearly sort of summary of what they plan to produce at Chattanooga. Chattanooga produces sort of the base yarn, like the lowest level product that they use, that then gets sent to Laurel Hill in most cases to be processed and turned into a final product. So this sheet lets them plan monthly estimated production runs. They plan by number of days on this sheet that they expect to run something, and then through a number of formulas that they've helped me define, it'll tell them how many pounds that will result in. So the planner usually has some idea based on forecast and previous years of sales, what volume is expected at this high level for each of these. They're called merge numbers, which is essentially a product family, you could think of it as. And then she'll go through this sheet and enter the number of days she thinks it'll take to meet the volume that they've forecasted. So she can do that for each month. There's what they call a planning board, which is just a summary of everything they've entered in the 12 months. And then there were some charts. And these are based on charts that they had in their initial template that they sent me. So they're essentially a recreation of that. It just keeps track of the stock level, the inventory level, and then the number of days of sales that they could sustain based on their inventory level. One more feature on this sheet, which again makes it a little more complicated than most, is originally there was a sort of intermediate step between the product mix and the daily order lineup called the machine scheduling. But it ended up not really being necessary. It was an extra step that they wanted to remove. So they can do that from within this sheet now with another pop-up, where once the planner has entered the number of days they expect a product to run, they can then open this pop-up form and assign more detailed production from those days. So this is where they'll actually say, they've scheduled 5 days for the entire month, but maybe there's a run that starts on the 3rd and it runs for 2 days out of those 5. It'll result in that much volume, and they want to apply it to a certain end product. So this kind of combines the high level and then a slightly lower level, an intermediate step into one sheet. This proved to be pretty popular since it sped up the planner's work. Again, that was a pretty common request. Just how can we streamline this? How can we make it easier? So this is where we landed to help speed up the product mix and machine scheduling. So they can do the high-level plan and assign it to an end product all in one place. So the values that they assign for these individual runs will get used in one of the printable schedules that gets sent down to the shop floor. So there's a product machine print schedule. I don't know if we'll see anything in it because this is just dummy data. Yeah, I don't have anything scheduled, but this is, again, based on a template that they sent us. It would show the, per machine, what product is currently running or currently scheduled to run, and then what's scheduled to run over the coming weeks. So it gives their shop floor people an idea of how to organize things, how to schedule things, and that's all based on this high-level plan and the machine-level scheduling. So those are the two major planning components. The rest is, like I said, largely schedules that are based on those other sheets. Most of this comes from the Laurel Hill daily order lineup. So based on what the sort of master planner has entered, once again, I don't have any data. Let me run it again with some actual data. Okay, so this is live data. So this is based on the production plan that they've entered in the daily order lineup, and this will attempt to sequence their treating schedule, the order in which they're going to treat weave product that they've produced to result in a final product, based on the day it was scheduled, how long it needs to run. And again, this was to try and sort of automate, speed up some of their processes where they don't have to manually schedule things. This gives them a good baseline to work with, and if they need to reschedule things, they can change the sequence number or just manually, resequence the sheet. They can cut and paste rows, whatever they need to do. And then it pulls in a whole bunch of supplementary data that was requested by their the person in charge of their treating scheduling. So they wanted to know things like when is their next shipment coming up, and I also show all the shipments that are planned for that product so they know well in advance what their deadlines are, what the next shipment quantity is going to be. The total order quantity is, out of all the orders that are for that product, that's the total quantity that they've got a plan for. And then I pull in how many pounds they've already got, how many pounds of the weave product they've got that could be applied to that final product. The planned production date pulls from the daily order lineup to show the earliest planned production date that they've entered on the daily order lineup. And then they've got, target and some specifications that they use to help schedule their production runs. So this gives them everything they need to know to properly schedule their treating processes on a daily time frame. And again, it's got a number of reference sheets. Most of these sheets kind of share the same pivot tables because everyone wanted to have a complete picture of sort of the state of affairs before they make any decisions. That's the same idea with the other schedules. The twisting schedule is a little more involved. it's based on the weave production entered in the daily order lineup, since each step of the process determines what's required in the step before it. So you can't treat something if you don't have weave product to treat, and you can't weave if you don't have twist product to weave. So this is based on the weave production. It shows them weekly buckets, and we're at a higher level now, so it's just the first two characters of the final SKU. That determines the base yarn that will be used in the product. So this gives them their weekly buckets, and a whole bunch of extra logic was put together to help them actually schedule twist production per machine. So they've got some master parameter edits that they can use to set up some of these values, like the number of machines they have. Obviously, the month, number of days in the month is just generated dynamically, depending on when they run it. And those are multiplied to get the max number of machine days they can schedule in a month. So this helps them actually plan out what specific machine and for how many days they plan to twist a certain yarn type. So this one combines sort of the functionality of a planning sheet as well as a schedule. Originally it was just a schedule, but they decided they wanted to be able to schedule machines here as well. So through a number of back and forth conversations with Chris, the lead contact there, we came up with a number of formulas and rules to facilitate that, where they can just enter the number of machines and the number of days, and the values will update themselves. And they've got all these intermediate summary rows that they requested, so they can see not only per yarn code, but per product family, how much they're planning. So it gives them basically every level of visibility that they have requested in one place. And those values that they've entered for the machines get saved to the database, so they're there next time they run the sheet. Those are more of a sort of a default starting point. They tend to run this probably weekly, if not daily. And the machine schedule that they've set up last time they ran the sheet probably hasn't changed a whole lot, so they usually just want to see whatever they'd entered last time, and then they can tweak it again and save it if they need to. But that's the functionality that provides, and that was all based on a number of back and forth conversations with them and their planners.
So Trevor, let me pause and ask a question here. So,
sure.
I know it was painful in those initial back and forth conversations to define the, I'll call it the process rules. Mm-hmm. But and I could be wrong, but I'm guessing the process is consistent. Like, I mean, the variables that they're going to change are machines, hours, efficiency, that kind of stuff. They're not going to change or what doesn't change is their process for building yarn. I mean, once you've captured that, has Chris come back to say, oh no, we want to change that? I mean, I'm sure there's lots of change in the development phase, but kind of after the fact, have you had any of that kind of stuff?
There's been a few times where they've actually maybe not redefined their process in terms of what they're physically doing. I mean, that's probably set in stone. But their business logic about how they reason about it or how they track it or certain formulas to calculate things, those have changed a number of times even after we've said, this is good, this is what we want to do. They've then realized later that that wasn't really what they needed or wanted. I'm trying to think of some examples here, but the daily order lineup had a number of changes based on things like quality control days and sort of freeze periods where nothing can be planned within this window. A lot of that stuff is kind of gone now. A previous version of the daily order lineup had some parameters at the top of the sheet that they could tweak to determine freeze periods and the number of days they wanted production to be set back. and there was a bunch of additional logic to try and help them find the best day to schedule product, and all of that got scrapped.
Oh, okay.
When that plan calculator came along, they realized that they were happier, I think, just having all the data in one place and then being able to just tweak everything to their heart's content. So initially we kind of went down a path of trying to have a lot of automated smarts to help them, or to, I mean, not do their job for them, but to try and make some decisions for them. And things change so quickly, and you know, day to day their plan needs to be fairly flexible, I guess. So in the end, most of that was scrapped in favor of that plan calculator, like I said, where they can just see everything and then tweak values until they're happy. And there's been a number of instances, like I said, just where calculations or, you know, how they might track things or comparison values, just sort of business logic stuff, has changed a number of times.
Okay.
But we were always able to give them what they wanted. It's just it kept changing.
Right.
What they wanted kept changing.
Has it reached some level of stability?
Yeah. At this point, things are pretty good. There was a number of growing pains while we were trying to iterate on those more complex reports I was showing you, the daily order lineup and the product mix. Like I said, there used to be another entire report that was in between those two that eventually got scrapped and replaced with that machine scheduling in the product mix. So most of the changes, I would say, came about through like a business flow, I guess, how they want to use it, the features they want to see, the logic they want to have. That changed a number of times. You know, the more they use it, the more they get an idea of what they want, and sometimes that meant throwing away like a week of work. But you know, it's more or less stable now.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Let me see here. I just want to take a quick look at that usage report. So you can see here, in some cases, you know, the daily order lineup for one plant was run almost every day in June, many times in August. So, and the Laurel Hill one gets run even more because it covers 3 processes. So you can see here in 1 month it was run 108 times.
Wow.
Right.
A lot of these other reports are sort of supplementary or perhaps obsolete in some cases, as functionality was sort of consolidated in things like that plan calculator. Some of these are probably not really used anymore, but yeah, you can see here the schedules as well. The treating schedule gets run every day and then some. So it's heavily used, and in several of my conversations with Chris, he said, you know, the adoption rate is stellar. Everyone's using it. Everyone's got ideas on how they want to change it or improve it. But we've got traction there for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, if you could, if you could save that and send it to us, just so we can recognize names. I mean, I think it'll be important for Ian to be able to know who some of these users are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the 2 main users are Chris Fernandez, who's our main point of contact, sort of the lead of the project on their side, and Danielle Hambright is their main planner. She covers both plants now. She covers Chattanooga and Laurel Hill since their other planner, Kelly, left probably back in June, thereabouts. I'll save that and send it to you.
Okay, thanks.
So yeah, a lot of these other reports are just sort of alternate views into the data. They're not as interactive. A lot of comparisons against either forecasts or you know, production plans versus actuals. One feature they requested that has recently sort of come back into usage is this freeze production plan. So this is supposed to be a metric that they would create at the start of each month once they've finalized their initial plan for a month. And it would save all the production they've entered in the daily order lineup for the month they select and store those in a separate table so they're not edited any further. And they use that as a baseline for comparisons and metrics to see, here was our initial plan, how much should we actually make, how much should we actually need, what were the actuals. So it gives them a way to sort of measure actual requirements from month to month. Here's the standalone version of that plan calculator I was talking about. So same idea, it gives them all the specs, except it doesn't have any of the actual production planning sections at the bottom here, but it has every item number that I can pull from the specifications tables. And it just lets them select any product and see all the specs relating to that product. And it'll pull in the future orders for them too, so they can see not only what they need to plan right now, but what's coming up. So this was never part of the spec, never part of the statement of work, but it was so popular, and it wasn't that much work to kind of split it out and give it to them. So I did that just because they really strongly requested it, and it wasn't a ton of work to make them happy.
Right. No, that's great. So it's used. You said it's used as a reference point to see all the data associated with these particular style SKUs.
Yeah, it's my understanding that some of the planners that don't have access to the daily order lineup, there's essentially two classes of user in the system right now. There's sort of the super user who can do anything and can see all the planning reports, and then there's the I guess per process planners where they would only concern themselves with the treating schedule or the weave schedule, and they don't get to see some of those higher level scheduling or planning reports. So I guess word got out that this calculator was added to the daily order lineup and everyone wanted it, so I added this to the sort of non-privileged set of reports. And it's my understanding they will sort of have this open just on one monitor or in another sheet, just always there as a reference point when they're trying to make decisions about how to schedule things. They might try and squeeze things in around the schedule if they've got a gap, and it's helpful for them to know how long something might take, how many finished pounds they can produce in a given window of time, or how many pounds are in a completed spool, that kind of thing. So it helps them make their decisions on the fly. Since it's my understanding they don't necessarily stick right to the schedule as given to them, the shop floor people obviously have a lot of expertise in what can actually be done in a given amount of time, and they've got domain-specific knowledge, so they know what can really be done, and they'll try to stick to the schedule, but like I said, they might try and squeeze in some additional product if they know they've got a major run coming up and they might not be able to meet it in a future run. They'll try and cram it in if they've got some spare time, or they might swap things around. So it helps them be as flexible as they need to be, essentially. And like I was saying, the rest of these reports are mostly just sort of data dumps or comparisons. There's a report here to just print out all the specification data that we have available to us, just so they can check and see if there's any discrepancies. One thing I should mention is that I had mentioned their internal S2K database before. We don't have access to that. What we do have access to is a replicated set of tables that they push from that S2K database into an SQL Server database that we do have access to. And those get mirrored every hour or so, I believe. And sometimes, very rarely, one of those replication jobs will fail and we'll get out of sync. And so Chris requested a report or two to help him diagnose those issues. So there's, like this report I was saying, prints out all the specifications as we see them, so he can see if a replication job has maybe failed and our specifications are out of sync with theirs. There's one to print out the raw uploaded forecast data, again, in case something failed and they don't have the complete picture. There's a number of reports here that just dump data, right? No formatting, no nothing, just as is, so he can see if things are missing or out of sync. Helps them do a bit of sort of diagnosing or maintenance on their own.
So let me stop and ask you there. So do you know what S2K stands for?
I don't offhand.
Okay, but it sounds like it's the source system or one of the source systems.
I think it's an IBM product. It's an IBM sort of corporate management software, as far as I know. Let's see, search here says S2K Enterprise Manufacturing Solution.
Oh, okay. Well, that's the way.
So some kind of IBM, manufacturing system, database backed, and that's what they started with. That's where a lot of their processes are still based in. But we get hourly updates from that system, so we have access to a subset of that data. And that's mostly for things like specifications and actuals that we don't track. Those aren't our responsibility to update or keep track of. They enter their specifications and generate their actual values on their own in the back end, and then we just get to see the results.
Yeah, I just did a quick search in it. Well, I found this from a company called VAI, an S2K Enterprise kind of it looks like kind of an ERP system. So perhaps what we should do is, if someone can take a note, I mean, just for clarification, it's more of a marketing question, but what is that S2K? Is it the one from? I didn't find an IBM link, but we should just know what it is, because it looks like that's the source system that most of the data is coming from, or sounds like, right?
Yeah, that's, for anything that they control, that is the source of truth.
Right, okay.
Stuff we control, like production plans or schedules, we are the source of truth for those. Right,
okay. Yeah, so that makes sense. So the connection to all that parametric item master specification data, it must live in the S2K system, and people perhaps update that as new products are introduced or changed or whatever.
Yeah, and there are some instances where those replication processes aren't particularly convenient or as automated as they should be, so I tried to mitigate that in a few places with something like this, synchronize the item master with the spec tables. So we maintain a separate item master, which is sort of used to decorate the data or add additional parameters that they don't use. Things like, the quality control days, for example. That's something that we store, and that is an addition to the item master. So there's a number of parameters, things like safety stock values, days of sales that they want to maintain for a product. Those are kept in our item master because those are specific to our product or this project, not things that they track internally.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So they don't exist in their own item master.
But our item master is obviously not one-to-one tied with theirs, because theirs is split into a number of specification tables that don't have any of that additional data. So I added this feature to pull any new item numbers from their specification tables and enter them into our item master so they can stay in sync. And they start with just some sort of agreed upon defaults for quality control days and days of sales and safety stock and all that, which is then their responsibility to go update those. So when they are actually planning something, those values are correct. Another thing that I haven't really touched on, I guess, is that all of these major reports or planning processes, the daily order lineup, the product mix, forecasts, those are all versioned, so they can do, you know, what-if scenarios or, you know, keep a history. It's my understanding that they'll usually just keep editing the same plan for quite some time until either something major has changed, in which case they might clone it and keep going. So cloning will use the same plan, but just give it a new version number, so it's clear that, you know, it's based on this other plan, but it's not the same plan. It's got a new version. And usually around year's end, they will create a new production plan that they will then use to plan the following year. And initially, we were creating a blank production plan for them, but again, in the interest of speeding things up and sort of favoring convention, they decided that they would prefer to just create a new plan from an existing plan and then tweak the numbers from there, since it seems like their orders don't necessarily change a whole lot from year to year. So, yeah, at the end of a year, they'll create a new plan. That'll give it a new plan date, version 1. They can call it whatever they like. And they'll go from there. And that applies to the daily order lineup. Product mix is the same thing, where they can create, clone, or create a new one. The forecast changes quite a bit more frequently, though. So it's also versioned, but they upload forecasts using this upload interface. This is where they can give it whatever title they like. And, you know, they would just click here and browse files. That changes potentially once a month, maybe more.
But changing as an input, you're saying, because we don't change the forecast once we get it.
We can, but I don't think they do. I gave them forecast edits where they can change the monthly quantity per item and also the sale price. But I'm not sure that they use that very often. I think instead they just upload a new forecast.
Okay.
And that forecast, you know, is always showing up here in the source forecast. So you can see, I mean, they uploaded 3 forecasts in September. Yeah, 1 in December, 1 in January, so once a month. That has been a bit of a source of issue because their forecast file format has changed a couple times, and it's not always a complete data set. And so there's been a number of times where they've tried to upload a forecast and it wouldn't work, and, you know, I'll get an email or a phone call. And almost every time it's because their forecast file didn't meet the specifications that we had defined. So actually just last week or so, I tried to put in some more logic to help them diagnose those upload problems, so we're not getting a phone call every day. The most common problem is that they'll have duplicate rows, and we can't allow that because for, you know, various data integrity rules, we can't have that. So I put in some more meaningful error messages to return to them. And I was just talking to Chris about that last week. And he seemed fine with the new, you know, messages where he's okay to fix the file if he knows what to fix. So I put in some more meaningful messages, and hopefully that will sort of take care of that problem. But that's one of those instances where we define something and it has changed a number of times. It seems to be stable now, but every now and then the data they generate won't be usable in its entirety.
Right.
Trevor,
Yeah.
have you heard any feedback from management there about about our solution?
Yeah. Every time I talk to Chris, well, when we were doing the development and major milestones were coming up, he always had positive feedback for me. He said everyone that used it was enjoying it and that they found it useful. At one point, he told me we were actually nominated for an internal award for, I guess, innovative solutions as something that, positively benefited their planning process.
Wow.
Nothing ever really came of it. I don't know if it's because we're not officially finished yet, but he mentioned it once or twice that we were nominated for some kind of internal award they have, which was pretty impressive, but nothing really came of it. So
for sure.
It might come up again once we've, officially closed out this project.
Uh-huh.
He did mention it to me once too, and there was something about just the cycle for the cycle. He thought perhaps there would be some nomination and recognition in the next cycle.
Okay.
Cycle. So Meg, that's something we can possibly make a note of and talk about tomorrow briefly if we have time.
Yeah, it'd be a pretty nice feather in our cap if we could get it.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall impression is that they're very happy with it. They like what we've given them, how flexible it's been, turnaround times. So I'd say we've built up an amount of goodwill there for sure.
That's great.
That's basically the overall summary. Like I said, the bulk of the complexity is centered around those two planning reports and then the schedules. And the rest is largely either master edits for, editing item masters or tweaking parameters, or they're just data reports for comparisons or viewing raw data, essentially.
They didn't get any tools like the dashboard or anything like that, right?
No. There's the set of charts that I showed you in the product mix.
Right.
That's about it in terms of dashboardy functionality.
Great. Well, that's great. Ian, do you have any questions? Sure, you probably do.
Not particularly. Trevor and I went over this on Friday, so
yeah, that's what I thought.
Been becoming acquainted with all the technology behind it as well.
Sure.
Right. That'll be yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's lots below the covers that we're not seeing and don't need to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. All that custom functionality comes at a cost, so this is unfortunately a little more involved than I'd say our average project.
Right.
So it can be a little more difficult to maintain, but I've tried to make it user friendly where I could. But this was an odd duck for sure. Yeah.
Okay. I don't think I have any questions. So tomorrow, what I will do is I think I put out by default a 30-minute request with Chris. That's probably enough. I'm just going to start off by saying, well, the purpose of the call is to talk about the project going forward, and going forward, Trevor's that you moved on. You're going to move on to something more exciting or something exciting and different. And make sure then that we introduce Brian and Ian as the transition support guys.
Right.
And I'd like to make sure we cover off a little bit of what does he think are open topics, and maybe also just cover back on a couple of these reference questions, but most importantly, make sure he's aware of the transition and our plan to manage that process, and talk a little bit about, you know, what's left and how can we quickly close that out, hopefully.
Yeah, last time I talked to him about the state of the project, in his mind, there is one piece of outstanding work that would kind of bridge the gap between their shop floor systems and our system. So they want to be able to export an Excel file from their shop floor system with information about product that is currently running, you know, how each machine is currently scheduled, that we could then upload and pull into perhaps that plan calculator I showed you, to just give them even more fine-grained detail to use in their planning. So they'll know what machines are in use and what machines are running what. So that'll give them another layer of information to help make their decisions. And then sort of the holy grail, I guess, was an export that we create that could be fed back into their shop floor systems to say, here's what we're planning to run. I don't think it'll be that complicated. The hardest part will just be trying to figure out how to present the data, because there's so much data on that sheet already. Trying to find some meaningful way to present it to the user might be tricky, but in terms of them sending us a file, us uploading it, and then exporting a similar file, that shouldn't be too bad.
Right. Okay. All right, well, sounds good. Thanks for taking the time, and we appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks
no
so much, Trevor, and if I don't get to talk to you, best of luck in your new endeavor.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.